Music, the universal language, has always been present in human societies. But throughout history, certain musicians became especially known for their brilliance. Mozart, Beethoven, Bach, Chopin. We call them virtuosos. Today, very few composers and performers are considered as music virtuosos. Among these few, most have developed this extraordinary gift from a very early age. Haunted, transcended by their instruments, virtuosos kindle deep emotions within us. They seem to belong to another world.
Excitement, a bit of loss of control. Madness, yes, I think there is a bit of madness actually.
It's a sort of total offering, where the ears, the reflexes, sensibility, liveliness, intelligence, all that is united.
I sort of feel up in the heavens when I play, especially when I get nice melody pops into my head. I feel in a dream, really.
How do these exceptional talents sense music? Are the brains of virtuosos different from ours? Could a virtuosity gene possibly exist? In research laboratories around the world, neuroscientists, musicologists, and psychologists are trying to uncover the mysteries of the musical brain.
Okay. Wonderful. Super. Great.
Virtuoso, a genius composer, or a highly gifted performer. The word itself can be interpreted in different ways.
There are two types of virtuosos. Some have extraordinary technique, but the soul is present in their music. Those are like trained seals, and there are lots of them. Actually, they're like people who are good at doing all sorts of gymnastics. True virtuosos are people who have an incredibly wide-ranging imagination and who have the sporting capacities to deliver better results than others.
Here, we are in Montreal, the cultural center and biggest city in Quebec. This is where Jean-Philippe Silvestri was born.
It's not really correct. It's not perfect. It's bugging me.
This 31-year-old talented young pianist is known as the piano poet in Quebec.
And that's pretty good.
He has already received many prestigious awards in Canada. Jean-Philippe brings us to his family home in Sainte-Julie, 30 kilometers away from Montreal, where he spent his childhood. That's where it all began.
How are things?
Hi, it's me. How are you doing? Are you doing okay?
Yes.
He was brought up in a family of musicians, with his mother being a violinist and his brother a professional pianist. Difficult for him to escape from music.
Well, then we're going to work a bit now?
I'll be listening.
Well, that's very nice. See you soon. I arrived here, I was 4 years old. That's when playing the grand piano totally started. Apparently, I used to sit underneath the piano when my brother was playing, and I said the names of the notes out loud because of perfect pitch. I think that I was always trying to play tunes on the piano, which led my mom to say, "Look, we'll give you classes." And then I took classes. It was fun at first, then not so fun. I was often fed up because it's discipline. I needed to practice, but I'm glad I continued. It's a cool job to play the piano, so it's okay. I also cried a lot to my parents. Silly piano. You know, but this instrument's a part of me, and it's pretty amazing. It really needs discipline, so it's not always easy. And it wasn't so cool to practice for 1 or 2 hours every morning from 6:30 to 8:30. Anyway, I don't know why they forced me to continue. I probably thought it was worth it. I don't know.
I think it takes a lot of work. Work is even more necessary than talent.
I think so too. It's like those who play in the Olympics, the athletes. It's all the same thing, talent and then work. You can't do it otherwise. There's a lot of suffering and sacrifices, for sure. That's for sure.
Despite the difficulties, this Quebecois virtuoso was already walking toward his own destiny at a very young age.
At 4, I was a concert pianist. Anywhere in the universe or in the world. That was much obvious.
Early on, Jean-Philippe's parents realized that he had a rare ability, absolute pitch. Only one person out of 10,000 can instantly recognize a random musical note. Jean-Philippe accepted to test this remarkable ability at the Brahms, the only international laboratory dedicated to research on music and the brain.
Dear Isabelle, I'm here for the test.
Great.
Isabelle Paretz, co-director of the Brahms, has been one of the first scientists worldwide to study the effects of music on the different zones in the brain.
But it's not the right note, is that normal?
C'est le range, c'est ça, donc tu cliques sur l'écran.
Okay, Jean-Philippe, we're going to test absolute pitch.
Wonderful. I hope that I'll be correct.
It seems to go fast. So you hear the sound,
Okay.
you choose the note on the circle, and you choose the octave.
Okay. Okay.
You're done?
Oui. Je pense que c'était ça.
Yes, it's an F. F. I would say it's here. Is the octave correct?
C'est un si, ça encore.
A software selects and plays a random note, and Jean-Philippe must identify and name it.
It's D. E.
Well, I think you have it, because you're very, very fast. You don't hesitate, you don't sing, you don't do anything. We don't need to test you for 3 hours.
Okay, I have work to do.
Usually, with absolute pitch, there's no planning. It's a simple association between a sound and a name. It's a bit random, and it's automatic. There's no need to think, no planning.
E.
The cerebral circuit used to recognize a note isn't the same if the person has absolute pitch or not. For a musician with normal pitch, known as relative pitch, the arrival of a sound first activates the auditory area and then triggers the prefrontal regions that are in charge of the working memory. The brain compares the sound with the notes that have already been memorized, and the sound can then be identified. For a musician with absolute pitch, the arrival of a sound doesn't activate the frontal regions linked to memory, but only activates the auditory area. Here, the sound is automatically associated to the note's corresponding name. It only takes a fraction of a second for the musician to identify and name any note. For a long time, it seemed necessary to have absolute pitch in order to become a great musician. Today, scientists and musicologists agree that this aptitude, although very useful to compose, is by no means a guarantee of virtuosity. To enter into the mind of virtuosos means to explore the strong link that exists between them and their instruments. In one of the Brahms studios, Jean-Philippe is about to attempt to describe what he feels when he plays one of the pieces from his first album, a disc of 13 of the hardest compositions for piano, entitled Virtuosity.
Here, virtuosity is it's about arriving with the means to manage to get to something bigger than the norm, out of the ordinary. It can even be, often in concerts, I perform virtuoso pieces that are calm, because I think that virtuosity also exists in calmness. It's like a Ferrari. We have to be tuned very accurately, and it requires a huge amount of precision. When I'm at a concert, I don't want to hear something like that. It shows that we are really focused if you manage to then. So it really requires incredible precision. It took me 5 years to find it to my liking. I like it now. It's okay. Yeah, and that each concert is always a challenge. Everything must be in place. The phrasing, the way, everything. It's very demanding, but I love challenges. So it's good.
What do you feel when you play a piece like this one?
Like this one? I would say... What's the word? It's not madness, it's a bit of... it's a whirlwind, in a way, with a bit of anxiety, excitement, a bit of loss of control. Madness, yes, I think there is a bit of madness, actually, with drama too. I never want to play to show off or anything like that. Even if there is a beautiful moment I just played, I rarely say to myself, "Congratulations, that was beautiful," because it disconnects me from everything. I try to stay inside as much as possible and to stay connected to the image and the energy that comes out. I don't always manage, but I try to do that as much as possible. It's like meditation. I don't think about anything at all anymore. I'm empty, and when I play, I let the vibrations be heard, and then I feel them, and the mind isn't there anymore. It flows naturally on its own. I connect myself to it easily, and I don't think about the audience. When I come out to play, I simply hear the musical curve and what I want to do with it. I also hear the differences, like if I want the B to be louder, the one a little softer, that one louder and staccato, loud and staccato, this one even louder. That's what I hear. That's what gives it an interesting curve. Just with that, it's enough. I really think that's where the focus needs to be, otherwise the whole concert falls flat.
When Jean-Philippe plays, he seems to be immersed in a nearly hypnotic cerebral state, triggering deep emotions within him. In order to understand how music influences his brain, we are headed to the Montreal Neurological Institute. Robert Zatorre is one of the leading specialists in music and the brain. He has been particularly interested in seeing how music stirs emotions within us.
Music can trigger many different emotions, some positive, some negative, very complex emotions, even emotions that are difficult to articulate.
Over the course of his experiment, Professor Zatorre made volunteers listen to music they enjoyed so that he could study what was happening inside their brains.
We were able to prove that dopamine is secreted in certain regions of the brains when we listen to an enjoyable piece of music. These regions had already been identified as being a part of the reward system.
The reward system, as researchers call it, involves dopamine, which is also known as the pleasure molecule. When we listen to a piece of music that we enjoy, this molecule is released by the neurons in the back of our brain. The dopamine influx then goes toward the nucleus accumbens, central point in the reward circuit, then goes to the amygdala, seat of our emotions, and then to the prefrontal cortex, one of the seats of decision-making. These three regions then trigger a wave of well-being in our brain, followed by our whole body. Up until now, scientists had shown how this reward circuit was involved in pleasures such as food, drugs, sex, and money. Music could also activate the same zones in our brains. The virtuoso's brain is constantly in contact with music, thus highly stimulating the award circuit. When Jean-Philippe plays the piano, he feels intense emotions with each note played on his instrument. We are now in Metz, in the north of France, where we meet the famous violinist, Teddy Rami. Tonight, he's performing at the Arsenal, one of the most beautiful concert halls in Europe. Of Albanian origin, Teddy Rami is a violinist with a stellar international career. At 42 years old, he has made his name in the violin world following an incredible life journey.
Having grown up in Albania, my contact with music was a bit more complicated, in the sense that we had a few discs, but not that many. We tried not to listen to them too much, so we would record them on tapes to listen without damaging the discs.
Even though at the time, living conditions were difficult in communist Albania, Teddy started learning the violin at 4 years old with his father, who was a teacher at the conservatory.
The violin had a very funny side to it. I was fascinated by it when I was a child. It always had this side to it, the pleasure of music and playing, balanced, of course, with the constraints and rigor of work.
Such rigor was imposed by an uncompromising father. Teddy developed dazzling virtuosity, leading him to receive an exceptional scholarship to study the violin in France at 11 years old. Alone, far away from his family, he became responsible very early. He then made an irrevocable choice. He would devote his life to the violin.
Before making this decision when I was about 15, violin and music had become completely vital for me. I mean that it's what I wanted to do, and I was ready to make all the sacrifices needed to succeed.
Teddy then started devoting himself fully to the practice of music, well aware that he had a rare talent to foster.
It's a sort of total offering where the ears, the reflexes, sensibility, liveliness, and intelligence, it's all united. We often think that people with those special talents are pretty much all the same. But what makes the difference, it's intelligence and perseverance. It's that type of madness that pushes you to go as far as possible.
Teddy Rami is rehearsing with his friend and pianist François Frédéric Guy. As a duo, they will be interpreting the works of Beethoven, particularly the Kreutzer Sonata. This is a rich and contrasted piece, provoking a certain emulation between both musicians.
It's overexcitement and it's a game. A bit like a sword-fighting epic film. Suddenly, just like that, he starts playing very quickly and I play quickly too.
And there's a form of rage, too. Yes, we feel all those sensations, actually, but it's true that this one pushes us easily. And I think it does it to the listener, too. There's something that's evident. a form of energy, a minor tonality, something like that.
First of all, Teddy is the ultimate virtuoso. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that he plays fast, but that he's able to express the smallest sensitivity in the music, the slightest variation through the timbre, the violin's bow, the violin's purity and tone. All those technical aspects, with all these little technical things put together, you have a great violinist, a great artist. He puts his ultimate virtuosity at the service of the music, and that's what impresses me so much.
Teddy accepted to take part in a few scientific experiments to better understand the link between his emotions, his brain, and his body.
A good left hand's important, otherwise we'd need to change sonatas.
Teddy Rami is expected at the University of Psychology in the heart of Geneva, the town where he lives. Didier Grandjean is a psychologist and the director of the Neuroscience Laboratory. His field of research, the relationship between music and emotions.
When you listen to music, you're not just hearing sounds. There's a whole string of motor activities that contribute to emotionality. Slow pieces of music that can evoke nostalgia, for example, might be associated to a decrease in motor activity. Whereas music that's very lively and joyful might activate the motor system more.
Is it okay like that?
In this first experiment, Teddy plays the role of the listener.
So,
He is equipped with sensors placed on different parts of his body. Using an electromyography, the team of scientists aims to record his muscular reactions when he listens to works of music that he enjoys and that trigger emotions in him.
When I listen, I'm more in the field of pure emotion. Because when I play myself, there's a physical factor, and there are things to manage. Whereas here, I'm free to be swept away by emotion.
The experiment's main objective is to measure and see if the emotions generated by music lead to an activation of some of Teddy's muscles.
Thanks a lot. I'm Didier Grandjean. Nice to meet you. So how did it go?
Very well. I enjoyed listening to this piece again, which I already knew.
What we noticed in terms of curves is that there was an interesting reaction at the level of the forearm extensor, the muscle that controls the bow. It wasn't flat, but the arm was quite stable. Unconsciously, maybe you were replaying the piece, or...
When we listen to music that's so expressive like this one, there's this idea that we actually use motor regions when we simply listen to music, even though there's no motor activity.
Sometimes I use this for my memorization work, where I replay pieces in my head and then I perceive all the gestures. I feel the touch of the chord, all the movements I make, all linked to the music that I hear. I have absolute pitch, so I hear the piece exactly as if I were playing it for real. And I guess that's what it is. Signals that don't result into anything but that.
The idea is that the movement isn't completed, but it is represented. That's what interests us. How the representation of the movement and the fact that you feel it in your body, how that contributes to the emotion you feel.
For Teddy, simply listening to an enjoyable piece of music stimulates his motor system, even though he doesn't move. Music, therefore, seems to be the source of a strong interaction between his body and his emotions. In order to see if this phenomenon has consequences on his playing, researchers imagined a second experiment.
We're going to equip you here, on the elbow.
This time, thanks to a motion capturing system, the scientists are about to record Teddy Papravami's movements. The violinist is given 3D glasses. Thanks to a virtual reality system, he finds himself in a concert situation in front of an audience.
So, Teddy, the bar piece in metronomic mode. Go.
For the experiment, Teddy must play in two very different ways. First, in the metronomic mode, which means that he must play very technically, without emotion. The second is the expressive mode, as if Teddy were playing in a concert.
Actually, when the music plays in a metronomic way, there's an oscillation of the pelvic girdle that counterbalances the control of the upper body. And in the expressive mode, it's the exact opposite. The sacrum stays stable, and everything revolves around more expressive movements. What's interesting with the musicians, and especially with virtuosos, is the fact that the musician, or the instrumental expert, can gradually separate himself from his movement and can get into the emotion because he's freed himself from controlling the movement. That's a fascinating articulation.
When we see Teddy in a concert setting, it seems impossible to imagine all the complex mechanisms at work inside the virtuoso's mind. In Montreal, Robert Zatorre has taken up a challenge to decode what happens in a musician's head when he plays in real time.
The whole brain is actually involved in music. What interests us is to see exactly which circuits are involved in what functions. And that's precisely because music is so complex. It involves perception, attention, memory, emotions, motor control, learning, among other things.
Robert Satori and his team of young researchers conducted a unique experiment. For this, they constructed a mini cello, specially designed to be used in an MRI. It took them 5 years to develop this strange instrument, equipped with optical sensors that are meant to measure movements and link them to cerebral activity.
So we're going to get you to play the cello now, if that's okay. Okay. Thank you. So what we were looking for initially is just to see that there is auditory activation and there is motor activation in the regions of the brains that are generally associated with those two tasks while they're playing the cello inside of the scanner, and that's exactly what we get. So if we look here, we can see that there's activation in the motor regions, and then if we look here in the temporal lobe, you can also see that there's auditory activation on both sides.
Not only does this allow us to identify the cerebral areas that are implicated, but also to see how these regions interact with each other. Because when an instrument like the cello is being played, it's not only about making a movement, but when you make a movement, it creates a sound. You must listen to the sound and adjust it according to how it comes out. So both systems, the auditory system and the motor system, must interact in a very specific way.
Playing a musical instrument activates many different zones in the brain simultaneously.
I have most of that one learned. Yeah, it is actually quite fun to play. I really enjoy it.
The sound produced by the instrument activates the auditory cortex, situated in the temporal lobes. It also activates the hippocampus and the prefrontal lobe, two zones involved in memory, allowing the musician to remember the piece of music he previously played. His movements also stimulate the motor areas. As for the visual cortex, it is used to decipher the musical score. Musical practice is therefore a real form of brain gymnastics. It is so intense that scientists want to know if it can actually transform the very structure of the brain. We are now in Caen, in Lower Normandy. At the Cicerone Institute, Hervé Platel, neuropsychology professor, has devoted his research to the cerebral networks involved in the memorization of music. Along with Mathilde Groussard, a young researcher, they were the first to compare the brains of 20 musicians with those of 20 non-musicians and study their differences.
It's right here?
Pauline, a musician for the last 15 years, has accepted to take part in the experiment. She is about to get an MRI scan of the brain, during which she is to listen to short musical excerpts. The goal, to make the connection between music and memory.
Are you doing okay, Pauline? Yes? So we're going to start the manipulation. It's a familiarity test. So you're going to evaluate your level of familiarity on a 4-point scale, projected on the screen in front of you. We're going to start. The first session lasts around 7 or 8 minutes. Okay. We're going to go next door for a debriefing session. I'm going to ask you a few questions on what you just did. So, when you heard those melodies, were there some melodies that reminded you of personal memories? Yes, there were several.
In order to identify a known melody, musicians and non-musicians use their memory, and more specifically, their hippocampus. But musicians are able to go beyond the simple recognition of a song's name. They also associate personal memories and contextual details.
I had the feeling of playing when I was listening. I saw myself playing it because I still have it in my fingers.
The experiment showed that this mechanism had direct consequences on the cerebral structure of the brains of musicians.
We also observe a modification in the very structure of the hippocampus, the region being bigger in musicians than in non-musicians.
Our brain isn't a muscle, but throughout our lifetime, its structure changes. New networks of neurons can be created by the brain or can disappear. We call this neuroplasticity. When we play a musical instrument, the repeated activation of certain cerebral zones has an impact on its structure. The hippocampus, which plays a key role in our memorization abilities, becomes bigger and denser in a musician's brain. In the case of virtuosos who have been practicing music from a very young age, their hippocampus is even more solicited.
Here you can see the number of years of musical practice, and we can see that the more you practice music, the more this region increases.
The experiments conducted at the Cicerone Institute go even further. The other zones involved in the playing of an instrument are also transformed.
We can say that the structures that are obviously modified due to the practice of music are the perceptual structures, the temporal regions, the motor structures found in the superior and frontal areas of the brain. And what we have shown is that there are other regions that change structurally in the brain. What's really interesting is to see how this change sustains itself in musicians who get older. These musicians, as they get older, and if they keep practicing music, may see that their memory will maintain itself with age.
Music is therefore a complete sport for the brain. Scientific studies have shown that musicians have increased learning abilities, longer attention spans, aptitudes for learning languages, and increased abilities in logical reasoning. The ones who started music very young also have better movement synchronization. According to a study led by Robert Zatori, the brain's right and left motor regions, which are in charge of controlling the hands and fingers, communicate better together in children who started learning music before the age of 7.
Musicians who started early are a bit better at synchronizing their movements. There's not a big difference, but it might make the difference between a great master and someone who's very good, but not exceptional.
Actually, most virtuosos have started music at an early age. This is also the case of Alma Duscher. This young 8-year-old prodigy is from London. Her parents are amateur musicians and music lovers, but Alma possesses an uncanny talent. She plays piano, violin, and has already composed her first opera. We meet her near Bâle in Switzerland. Alma has come to spend a few days in the mountains with her parents and her younger sister, Helen. Even when she goes on a walk, Alma never leaves without her jumping rope.
I'm telling a story in my head while I'm waving this, and I can see pictures in my head. And sometimes also when I'm waving this, I get melodies. I sometimes get melodies when I'm waving this, and this is very special, and I love doing it.
Hello, Alma. Hello. Hello.
The Duscher family comes to Switzerland a few times a year for the opportunity to see one of Alma's teachers, Tobias Kram.
Are we going? Yes.
Yes.
Tobias is a musicologist and piano teacher. Today, he has a surprise for Alma, getting her to play the church organ in his village.
And these 4 are for the pedals.
For the first time, Alma can play the organ and reach the pedals.
The normal sound. Montre.
It is really nice to play. It's such a powerful sound, amazing sound, echoing all over the church. The piano dies away much quicker and it's not so rich and powerful. It doesn't have all these different stops and sounds.
Tobias teaches improvisation to Alma. His method, to start from a bass with a score for the left hand and to integrate melodies with the right hand, a way for Alma to explore her imagination.
Good.
This is a new one.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is
To start it. They come when I'm not trying to get melody, so often when I'm skipping and when I'm sleeping, also when I'm in bed. I sometimes wake up in the night and I have really beautiful melodies and I write them down.
How would number 3 sound actually?
I sort of feel up in the heavens when I play, especially when I get nice melodies. A nice melody pops into my head and I begin playing it. And I feel in a dream, really.
Bumpa, 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 bumpa.
She experienced things in such an intense way in her imagination. She would experience something in the real world and very intensely for, 10 minutes, and then she would forget, she would sort of shut down and it would all go on in her head. And I remember then even that this intensity was something that quite surprised us.
She's so enthusiastic, and it's such a natural part of her that I can't imagine living any other way, really.
I listened to the recordings of her improvisation and her little compositions, and I was amazed how much her music was like a flow, like a river.
אנחנו כאן בחינוכית אוהבים במיוחד ילדים, ולכן מודים לאלמה שהסכימה לבוא אלינו. שלום אלמה, מה שלומך?
טוב מאוד. Yes, I love giving concerts and playing for lots of people. It's extremely exciting. I love playing for an audience.
So we were very afraid about it. We tried, to do almost nothing or the very minimum in terms of performance, because we thought, how will she cope with it? But in fact, she just flowers. She just sort of blossoms, and she needs it. She had this personality of this wanting to, project her musicality.
I'm going to be a violinist and pianist and composer. And my parents always said that you couldn't really do all of these, it was too difficult. I said I didn't care if it was difficult or not. I still wanted to do it.
So why do a few children, such as Alma, become prodigies?
She plays the violin admirably well, with marvelous expression and sound. I really admire her. She already seems to have the maturity of a concert player.
Bernard Le Chevalier, former neurology professor, is one of the first in France to have focused on the connections between music and the brain. He is the author of the book called Mozart's Brain, and he also addressed the mystery surrounding child prodigies.
It's not only about having a gift, because this child must have worked a lot. She has been perseverant and has parents who know how to take care of her, knowing that they have the responsibility to develop her talent. Leopold Mozart said, "It's a gift from God, and if I don't enhance this gift, I'm committing a sin."
Most child prodigies have in common the fact that they were immersed in a favorable musical environment, as was the case for Mozart.
The Salzburg apartment was very small, and in it, music could be heard from morning to night. Mozart's father, Leopold, was a musician in an orchestra, and friends came to rehearse at his house, so Mozart could hear sounds even in his mother's womb.
Besides a favorable musical environment, scientists wonder whether virtuosos may also have biological predispositions.
Each brain is unique and has certain capacities. These capacities are simply exploiting something that already exists and that needs to be developed. But for certain people, it never develops. Basically, this little girl has the ability to brilliantly organize material that actually exists in each one of us.
So are these cerebral abilities determined by a favorable environment or by genetics? What in the talent of virtuosos can be attributed to nature and to nurture? Back to the Brahms Laboratory in Montreal with Isabelle Paretz. This researcher is actually working on establishing the mysterious connection between genetics and biological predispositions to music. In this quest, she studied certain pathologies, such as amusia. The people who suffer from this are completely indifferent to music.
When there is amusia, we found several in the family. First, it's reassuring it's not the whole family is amusia. Otherwise, one might say, well, there is a small environmental problem, or there is something that happened. No, this is roughly half that will be. So it's not a sporadic mutation. It's really something that seems hereditary.
Her work has shown that amusia is in fact a genetic illness. So if that is the case for an indifference to music, could the talents of virtuosos also have biological origins?
Today, we are more ready to accept the idea that both talent and amusia are the results of specific genetic conditions. It might not be the same genes that are involved in amusia and of virtuosity, but yes, there's probably a favorable biological and therefore genetic framework. There's nothing like practice or lack of musical practice to explain such extremes.
Virtuosity could therefore be the result of biological predispositions, of a stimulating musical environment and intensive practice, thus modifying the brains of musicians with extraordinary talent. And if some people dream of discovering the virtuosity gene, researchers are still having difficulties defining the extent of nature and nurture in the development of virtuosos. This might be the proof that some things are hard to explain, despite modern science and technology. This nearly mystical link between the virtuoso and his instrument, the harmony between emotions, movements, and notes for Jean-Philippe, Teddy, and Alma, the musical brilliance that allows us to dream and touches us at the very heart of our souls.
It's easier than Chopin. That's crazy, but that's what it is.